classic connoisseurs of the creepy and chilling rejoice, as there is a whole Addams Family reunion. With Wednesday's Wednesday release, fans are fawning over the corpses and capers at Nevermore Academy. Y'all know we'll be back to dig up those graves, but for now, let's go over just a few details and references you may have missed in season 1 of Wednesday. Hey, it's Patrice with Screen Rant, and obviously there's going to be some spoilers ahead, so if you haven't watched Wednesday, I don't know why you're on this video. Go watch Wednesday. This is one of the 2 explicit references Wednesday makes to the first Addams Family show. The line, "They're kooky like you," which gets Wednesday defensive because she responds with, "I prefer spooky." If you needed a reminder, here it is.
You're not scary, you're just kinda kooky.
I prefer spooky.
But if we're going to go over one of the most well-known theme songs in TV history, we're gonna make a little game out of it. Let's see if you can try to say it along without snapping. They're creepy and they're kooky, mysterious and spooky, they're all together ooky, the Addams Family. Yeah, I'm not a singer, so I didn't sing that. The now famous theme was composed in 1964 by gilded Hollywood composer Vic Mizzy. It's mostly missing in the Wednesday show beyond the 2 blaring callbacks we have to it on this list. After our brief touch with the red-hot pitchfork that is Reagan's legacy, we get to dive headfirst into the murky moss-covered lake that is Edgar Allan Poe's. Nevermore Academy wears its Poe inspiration on its sleeves, claiming he is one of the most famous alumni and the inspiration for the Poe Cup. But he was no stranger to controversy, be it his weird obsession for his cousin or his debilitating alcoholism. Edgar Allan Poe was precisely unrestrained. Before we leave this entry, his raven which screeches Nevermore was indirectly inspired by the often tragic Charles Dickens, who will appear once more in due time.
Ophelia is the one who kills herself after being driven mad by her family, correct?
As Wednesday so astutely points out, Ophelia drowns. Who is Ophelia, you may wonder? Well, if you don't know, then you probably haven't seen a little known play called Hamlet, where in the play she's Hamlet's love interest. In Wednesday she is the namesake for her dorm and drowns forever in the pond. But her death isn't as concrete as Wednesday makes it seem. She mostly dies off stage in the show, so her passing can come as a little bit of a mystery. I mean, she is speaking almost nonsense when Hamlet sees her last, so the idea is she's so overcome with the plots and deaths that she succumbs to her depression. But there are other theories. Could she have simply fell in and drowned? Was she perhaps pregnant and couldn't bear the thought of living without her love? You should watch the show and decide for yourself. We could go on and on about the use of names in fiction, so you could guess by the name of this entry who we're going to focus on for now. In the show, Ajax the Gorgon slithers his locks into the heart of Wednesday's fanged roommate Enid, but he shares more than just a short fate with Medusa. If you recognize his name, it's probably due to the Deadpool character of the same name. Our scaly friend shares little in common with that character though, besides the name. A name that dates all the way back to the ancient Greeks, where Ajax is a figure living in the shadow of Odysseus and Achilles. A very fitting name, as this is the very mythology that birthed the Gorgon as we know it today. The first sign Thornhill was up to no good was her initial gift to Wednesday. The Black Dahlia was a murder case involving the gruesome slaying and dismembering of Elizabeth Short, named such due to her strikingly dark hair and dress. Now we understand the dark humor in a beautiful flower that's associated with such an ugly crime. We are, after all, on Wednesday's side. We're not the normies. But Thornhill is. She's supposed to be, at least. Why would someone willingly give another person a reminder of a murder, when any other macabre flower would work just as well? It really could have been foreshadowing the horrid plans Thornhill had in store for our poor Wednesday. Because as she said, there are no coincidences. This may just be a product of Burton doing the Addams Family, but there is a constant reinforcement of a black and white motif. Of course, Wednesday isn't a fan of color, and this is a Burton product, but it goes deeper than a color palette. Wednesday is told life is not black and white. She's told that she's in black and white, and even her portrait painted by her admirer Xavier has her signature domino look. Now this is far from a bad thing, mind you. The Addams Family started off in black and white, so it's nice to see it being used well. Even when Wednesday is wearing something outside of her normal muted uniform, she's still showing her Addams pride. If you weren't listening carefully, you might have missed this very intrinsic aspect of Wednesday's character in the show. When fixing the espresso machine for her soon-to-be first kiss, Wednesday says she's learned Italian because it's Machiavelli's native tongue. Who is Machiavelli? You may know him from his most famous work, The Prince. Machiavelli was an Italian diplomat and politician whose most famous belief was that for those who rule, it is far better to be feared rather than to be liked. The very sentiment that Wednesday seems to live by. Of course, the show is in a way an an extended character study. By the end of it, Wednesday is far more comfortable with people not necessarily fearing her. So this is technically 2 entries in one, so listen closely. Nero was a Roman emperor famous for setting his dissenters on fire. There's a common myth that he played the fiddle as Rome burnt around his palace. While that sounds cool as hell, this is false. In fact, the instrument he was supposed to be playing wouldn't have been invented yet. But his horrible reputation is probably why Wednesday named her Scorpion after him. But that's not all. This is clever foreshadowing to her later actions, because as the statue of Crackstone burns, Wednesday is there watching it playing her cello, which hopefully I don't need to remind you now is related to the very instrument Nero supposedly played. And this is far from the first time Wednesday has used fire for revenge. There is no possible way the black cat outfits the Ophelia dorm wears are completely coincidental. The leather and cloth fabric stitched together at odd angles, the overall cat theme, the very fact that Tim Burton himself is directing half of the episodes. Y'all can't tell me Wednesday's outfit isn't a reference to Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman. If you needed more proof the last one was no mistake, then look no further than the boys team. They're all dressed as court jesters with clown makeup, all of which also bear a striking resemblance to another criminal clown we've come to know. It doesn't help that they're also called those jokers, but I'm staying on this fact too long. Let's move on. So just to backtrack a little here, Charles Dickens inspired Edgar Allan Poe in more ways than one, and the show is no different. Charles Dickens had a pet raven that also helped inspire Poe's famous feathered foe, but sadly that raven has died. And what do you do with the dead? Stuff them, of course. That sounds sick, but hear me out. Dickens himself was a fan of taxidermy, having several himself, meaning Uriah's Heep is more than a clever Dickens reference. It's a rather fitting name given the circumstance. It also shares a name with a late 60s rock man, meaning the rocking mouse with the mohawk belongs more than he knows. Clouds are clearing and I think I might wolf out. So let's speed these up a bit, shall we? Goody Addams has a clear connection to Goody Proctor, who was tried and almost executed for being a witch. She thankfully survived. A smaller nod to a naughty nuisance in the never-ending Addams clan is a portrait to a not-so-familiar face for fans, the ladies' man Cousin It. And who exactly is this handsomely haired fellow? And how is he related? Like so many things in the Addams family, it's not quite simple. He's a product of the producer of The 60s Show, not an Addams original. He's related to Gomez in some way, and the Playboy has an IQ of 300. I can feel some of you guys shaking needing to know. What's under his hair? Roots, of course. Speaking of those loose familial connections, we get a reference to the ever mysterious Addams' grandmother. Like Nancy Reagan, but more pleasant to be around, Wednesday's grandmother is an old witch who can be seen plotting and toiling over potions and brews. She really is a matriarch to be feared. But whose mother is she? Nobody knows for sure. I guess when you get that old, you really could be anyone to anybody. Though I have a sneaky suspicion that by the time that riddle is solved, she'll have outlived us all. Equal parts eccentric, erotic, and explosive, in the latter half of the season we get to see Fred Armisen play Uncle Fester, and with his newfound role comes some newfound power. Fester has always been one to elude death in the law, but how exactly could he show such frightening feats of electric manipulation? It could be from an electric chair misfire, but in reality it's a reference to one of his more famous gags. Missing entirely from the Wednesday series is Fester's iconic light bulb tick, in which he would bite a bulb and make it shine. It's never been explained how exactly he pulls off this party trick, but you know, it isn't too much of a logical leap to say it comes from some kind of electrical current that he can manipulate at will. Where would you guys film a show about vampires, werewolves, and outcasts of the like? Well, Wednesday decided to film in Transylvania, Romania, of course. Much of the show and its principal photography was based out of the legendary region. A cool little connection to all things supernatural. But let's not just leave it at that. While many of our favorite creeps and crawlies find themselves haunting its ground, think Dracula and the like, most Romanians wouldn't be caught dead with garlic hanging off their necks. So why do we associate the area with the dark and decrepit? We have Vlad and Bram to thank. You may know Vlad by his other name, the Impaler or Dracula. When writing his 1897 horror story, Bram borrowed the Romanian setting. Speaking of spooky settings, make sure you guys keep those eyes peeled, because the entirety of Nevermore Academy is crammed with fun little Easter eggs. From the gargoyles that almost kill Wednesday being modeled after the various groups in the high school, to the portrait of a young Morticia and Gomez sitting in a very familiar looking wicked chair. The set design is truly something to be admired. Does that twisted botanist seem familiar to you? Because I swear I've seen those murderous eyes before, but they were behind pigtails with a burning camp behind her. So it's quite obvious that Christina Ricci is far from the average normie. She herself once wore the dark dull dress that Ortega has mastered. For a lot of fans, when they picture Wednesday, their minds flash to her portrayal in the early 90s. The show even pits the two against each other in a battle of wits. The prospect of now undertaking a character alongside Ricci was daunting to Ortega, but as stated before, she was quick to find her stride. Aside from the offhand remark that the two aren't so different, which Wednesday denies of course, the show usually leaves the past behind, save for the family reunion line. But Nicole Fulgere wasn't in the show, so we can move on. Any Addams family member could tell you about their distaste for all things uppity. Who other than Wednesday would give us that knowledge by claiming she could eat Girl Scouts for breakfast? A reference to a long chain of Wednesday not liking the outdoorsy group of girls. She also expressed regret in the '91 films that their cookies weren't made from real cookies. Moonlight bleeds through the spiderweb framed window, brawling its silky pattern across the decaying wooden floor in bright yellows and pinks. But outside sits our mistress of mayhem, sawing her cello with an eerie vigor. Her fingers pull notes out of the ether like bats in the night, continuously creeping the melody along, contorting with the music itself as if possessed by the instrument. This is no song of the damned, nor is this a bewitching song to call the lost. This is Painted Black by the Rolling Stones. But through her spindling fingers, Ortega produces a cello solo worthy of two cellos themselves. This penchant for music will not be the last for dear Wednesday.
That I'm going to be responsible for something terrible. Not good terrible like Ivan.
Reputations precede those who find themselves in Wednesday's gaze of admiration. Her love for all things troubled and terrible means anyone she finds worthwhile to learn about have done some unsightly things. I'm talking specifically of no other than the model for all things terrible, Ivan the Terrible. Ivan was the first Tsar of Russia in the latter half of the 16th century, 1547 to 1584 to be exact. He's mostly known for his aggressive land gathering. But what makes Ivan so terrible? His paranoia and a little political propaganda? Maybe. The quick and dirty of it is this. For the longest time, people believed he had struck his son dead with a metal cane. However, that may not be true. Either way, he seems to be a pretty good role model for Wednesday, I guess. Cryptologists, get out your pens and papers because we're talking about some of the most fun things in mysteries, ciphers. Granted, this one was mostly just an anagram, but a clever one nonetheless. We won't spoil the actual riddles or their solutions because it was very fun to find out the answer alongside Wednesday, and we wouldn't want to rob you of that fun. But the actual answer and entrance to the secret library of the Nightshades is simply snapping twice. An extremely obvious nod to the theme once again, but one that brings a devilish smile to the faces of fans. Let's stop for a second and ask a few questions though. How many students and faculty must walk past this Edgar Allan Poe statue every day of the year? Let's be conservative and say 100. In just 1 year alone, that's 36,500 times someone would be near the prized poet. And nobody has ever accidentally snapped twice near it? Something's not adding up. Thornhill's second to last gift to Wednesday was yet another slight towards Wednesday's failure to uncover her nefarious plots. Because much like the iconic hubristic doctor before her, Thornhill is using the stolen parts from the dead to create her own life. Or recreate it. Where does resurrection fall on the spectrum of creation versus recreation? Monster is not the fairest way to describe the ghoulish beast living inside Tyler. As previously stated, the hunched over, roided out golem was designed by no other than Burton himself, and his inspiration can be seen pretty clearly in Xavier's Shed, because so many of his paintings resemble the extremely gruesome Saturn Devouring His Son by Francisco Goya. His long limbs, hunched frame, and even the terrifying bulging eyes match the Titan's most stomach-churning act. We'll end with the sweetest, if slightly unsettling scene in the entire show. The Raven is Nevermore's prom, so you know there's going to be great details hidden throughout the dance. But why are we ending on it? Is it because of the clear Carrie reference, or Wednesday absolutely killing it on the dance floor? Both good, but there's something even more. The entire school is told to wear white, making this a pearly white raven. White ravens can be interpreted in two ways, either something extremely rare, or an omen of doom. Both work well with the scene. Wednesday had fun dancing with a date. Never heard of, it's so rare. And the unfortunate animalistic attack on poor Eugene in the woods. Never trust a white raven. Now we must take our leave from the living and embrace the sweet stolen slumber of all those who've come before. But like any good Addams, this is far from the end. You could spend years at the autopsy table breathing in the intoxicating embalming fluids of creativity seeping out from the show. But until we rise again, have a wonderful death. Oh, and shout out to my writer for that extremely well written conclusion.